The clipboard hit the concrete with a sharp crack. "I said no." Mason Holt's voice echoed across the third phase training compound at Naval Special Warfare Center, Coronado. 43 SEAL trainees stopped mid-drill, heads turning toward the confrontation near the weapons storage facility. The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, illuminating a scene that would have been unremarkable on any other military installation. But this was Coronado. This was where America forged its deadliest warriors. And in this arena of testosterone and tactical excellence, the woman standing near the storage checkpoint looked catastrophically out of place. She was small, maybe 5'3". Her logistics uniform hung loose on a frame that looked like it belonged behind a desk, not on a military base where the nation's most elite operators were being sculpted through suffering. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her hands, pale, delicate, unmarked, held nothing but a safety inspection form that fluttered slightly in the Pacific breeze. "Sir, this is a mandatory pre-exercise weapons check. Regulations require all personnel to sign off before accessing the armory for live fire drills." Her voice was quiet, not weak, but quiet, the kind of voice that got lost in rooms full of men who had learned to communicate through controlled violence. "Regulations?" Mason laughed, and his squad joined him like a chorus of jackals who had spotted wounded prey. 6'2" of muscle and arrogance stepped closer, close enough that his shadow swallowed her completely. The veins in his forearm stood out like cables beneath sun-darkened skin. His jaw, perpetually clenched, spoke of a man who had never encountered a problem he could not solve through physical dominance. "You want to tell me about regulations? I've survived Hell Week. I've completed over 200 hours of combat training. I've pushed my body past the point where most men would have quit, cried, and crawled back to their comfortable civilian lives." He stepped even closer. She did not step back. "And you think some paper pusher is going to tell me when I can access my weapons?" He snatched the form from her hands and crumpled it into a ball without breaking eye contact. The sound of paper crushing seemed obscenely loud in the sudden silence that had fallen across the training yard. "Go back to your office, sweetheart. Let the real warriors handle the real work." The woman said nothing. She simply bent down to pick up her clipboard, and as she did, Mason's boot connected with it, sending it skidding across the concrete toward the drainage grate. Metal scraped against asphalt with a sound that made several watching trainees wince. Laughter erupted. 40 witnesses, 15 instructors within earshot. Not one moved to intervene, but somewhere in the shadows of the observation tower, a figure watched. A figure who had not been seen on this base in 3 years. Admiral Isaac Thornton, the man they called the Shadow, lowered his binoculars with an expression that defied interpretation. His eyes were fixed on the woman they called a paper pusher, and in the next 20 minutes, everything they thought they knew was about to shatter. The logistics coordinator's name was Ivy Mercer. According to her personnel file, she had been assigned to Naval Special Warfare Center 8 months ago, following an unremarkable career in military administration. Her previous postings included a supply depot in San Diego and a clerical position at Naval Base Point Loma. Nothing in her official record suggested anything beyond competent mediocrity. She straightened slowly, leaving the clipboard where it had fallen. Her eyes, a shade of gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, moved across the faces of the men surrounding her. Not frantically, not fearfully, methodically, like someone counting exits in a building they might need to leave in a hurry. "I understand, sir," she said, her voice unchanged. "I'll note that you declined the inspection." "You'll note whatever I tell you to note." Mason stepped forward again, and this time his hand shot out to grab her shoulder. Not hard enough to leave a bruise, but hard enough to establish dominance. "Actually, you know what? I don't think you understand anything. I think you wandered onto this base thinking you could push papers and collect a paycheck while real soldiers do the actual work of keeping this country safe." From across the training yard, Logan Pierce watched the confrontation with growing interest. At 24, Logan was the golden boy of Class 237, fastest times on the obstacle course, highest scores on tactical assessments, the kind of trainee that instructors pointed to when they wanted to show recruits what excellence looked like. His blonde hair was cropped military short, and his blue eyes held the easy confidence of someone who had never known failure. "Mason's really laying into her," observed Petty Officer Fern Holloway, who had stopped mid-stride to watch the scene unfold. Unlike most of the spectators, her expression held something other than amusement, concern, perhaps, or recognition of a pattern she had seen too many times before. "She's logistics," replied the trainee beside her, a dismissive wave accompanying his words. "What did she expect, coming out here during third phase? This is where we separate the warriors from the pretenders." Fern said nothing, but her eyes remained on the small woman who stood motionless in Mason Holt's shadow. "Before we continue, I want to ask, where in the world are you watching this story unfold? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe that true strength is not always visible, that heroes sometimes hide in plain sight, then you are going to want to see what happens next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because tomorrow I have something even more incredible waiting for you. The confrontation might have ended there, with Mason's point made and his dominance established, if Connor Walsh had not chosen that moment to arrive. Connor was everything Mason was not: shorter, slimmer, with the kind of aristocratic features that suggested old money and older connections. His father was Rear Admiral Douglas Walsh, a name that opened doors throughout the naval hierarchy and closed mouths that might otherwise have offered criticism. "What's going on here?" Connor asked, though his tone suggested he already knew and thoroughly approved. "Just educating our logistics support about the natural order of things." Mason released Ivy's shoulder and stepped back, satisfied that his message had been received. "She seems to think paperwork trumps training schedules." Connor circled Ivy slowly, looking her up and down with the casual contempt of someone who had never questioned his own superiority. "You know who my father is? Rear Admiral Walsh. One phone call from me and you're reassigned to counting toilet paper in Alaska." He pulled out his phone and waggled it in front of her face. "Should I make that call? Because honestly, you're kind of ruining the vibe here." Ivy's response was barely audible. "That won't be necessary, sir." "Oh, it won't be necessary." Connor mimicked her quiet tone with exaggerated femininity. "Listen to her, boys. So polite, so accommodating." He leaned in close enough that she could smell the protein shake on his breath. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you're too accommodating. Maybe you need to learn that accommodation doesn't earn respect around here. Results do." The crowd had grown. What had started as a minor confrontation had become entertainment, a break from the relentless physical punishment of third phase training. Trainees gathered in clusters, some openly laughing, others watching with the detached interest of spectators at a blood sport. Chief Silas Hartwell emerged from the equipment building, drawn by the unusual silence that had replaced the normal sounds of training. At 52, Hartwell was a legend in the SEAL community. 23 years of service, including deployments to every hotspot that had shaped modern military history. His face was a topographical map of hard decisions made in harder places. Scars crossed his jaw and temple, souvenirs from moments that remained classified. He took in the scene with a single glance. The logistics coordinator surrounded by trainees, Mason Holt playing alpha male, Connor Walsh waving his father's name around like a credit card. And in the center, a woman who should have been crying or running or doing any of the things that would have been expected of someone so obviously outmatched. She was doing none of those things. Hartwell's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He had seen thousands of recruits cycle through this program. He knew every variation of fear, every flavor of bravado, every shade of courage and cowardice that the human spirit could produce. What he saw in Ivy Mercer's posture did not fit any category he recognized. She was not afraid. He filed the observation away and crossed his arms, choosing observation over intervention. Whatever this was, it had not yet crossed the line from harassment into actionable misconduct. And part of him, the part that had survived 2 decades of evaluating human potential under pressure, wanted to see how it played out. "This is getting boring," announced Logan Pierce, joining the inner circle of tormentors. His arrival shifted the dynamic. Where Mason relied on physical intimidation and Connor on social status, Logan brought something more dangerous: competence. If she wants to be taken seriously, let her prove it. 20 push-ups, right here, right now, that's nothing for anyone who actually belongs on this base. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. 20 push-ups was indeed nothing, a warm-up, a baseline test that any SEAL candidate had long since rendered trivial. Ivy's gray eyes moved to Logan's face. Something flickered there, too fast to identify. "I'm not a trainee, sir. My duties don't require physical fitness assessments." "Your duties don't require you to be here at all," Logan shot back. "And yet, here you are. So, either prove you belong, or admit you're just a tourist in a warrior's world." Lieutenant Blake Vance chose that moment to step out of the administrative building adjacent to the weapons storage facility. Unlike the trainees, Vance carried the rank and authority of a commissioned officer. Unlike Chief Hartwell, who observed with measured neutrality, Vance's expression held something calculating. He had been watching the confrontation through the window for several minutes, and his appearance now seemed deliberately timed. "What's the holdup?" he asked, though his casual tone did not quite mask an undercurrent of anticipation. "We have live fire drills scheduled, and I'm seeing a lot of standing around." Mason snapped to something approaching attention. "Sir, the logistics coordinator was trying to enforce an inspection requirement. We were just explaining how things work around here." "Ah." Vance's eyes slid to Ivy, and unlike the others, he did not look at her with contempt. He looked at her with something that might have been curiosity or recognition. "The inspection requirement. Yes, I remember seeing that in the morning brief. Technically correct, if somewhat overzealously applied." He stepped closer to Ivy, positioning himself between her and the trainees in a way that could have been interpreted as protective, but somehow felt like something else entirely. "You know what, logistics specialist? I have a suggestion. If you want these men to respect your authority, maybe you should demonstrate that you understand what they do, not push-ups." He shot Logan a dismissive glance. "Anyone can do push-ups. I'm talking about something more relevant. The CQB course. Close quarters, battle training was the heart of third phase. It taught SEAL candidates to clear rooms, neutralize threats, and operate in the confined spaces where modern warfare was increasingly fought. The course in Building 7 was designed to simulate real-world combat environments, complete with mannequin targets, obstacle configurations, and timing systems that measured performance down to the hundredth of a second. "Sir," Chief Hartwell spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of decades of authority, "that course is designed for certified operators. It's not appropriate for administrative personnel." "Neither is being surrounded and harassed by 40 trainees," Vance replied smoothly. "But here we are. Sometimes circumstances push us beyond our comfort zones. Sometimes that's exactly what we need." The suggestion landed like a grenade in the assembled crowd. Sending a logistics clerk through the CQB course was not just cruel, it was potentially dangerous. The course involved simulated weapons, rapid movement through confined spaces, and split-second decision-making that required months of specific training. But the trainees loved it. Here was entertainment that went beyond verbal humiliation. Here was a chance to watch someone fail spectacularly, to prove definitively that their world belonged to them and them alone. "I'll do it." The words were quiet, but they silenced the crowd as effectively as a gunshot. Every head turned toward Ivy Mercer, who had spoken without raising her voice, without changing her expression, without showing any sign that she understood what she had just agreed to. "Excuse me?" Mason blinked, genuinely surprised. "You'll do what?" "The course. I'll run the CQB course." Fern Holloway pushed through the crowd, her face pale. "Ma'am, you don't have to do this. This is hazing. It's against regulations. I can file a report." Ivy looked at the young petty officer, and for a moment, something almost warm crossed her features. "I appreciate your concern, petty officer, but it's fine, really." She turned back to face her tormentors. "Building 7, 5 minutes. If someone could provide me with a training weapon." The crowd began moving almost immediately, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Bets were already being placed. $20 said she would not last 30 seconds. 50 said she would trip over her own feet before clearing the first room. 100 said she would cry before the course was complete. Nobody bet on her succeeding. As the group migrated toward Building 7, Master Chief Noah Garrett emerged from the equipment shed where he had been conducting inventory. His path crossed directly with Ivy's, and for a fraction of a second, their eyes met. Garrett was 61 years old, with 3 decades of special operations experience etched into every line of his face. He had seen combat in places that did not appear on any official map. He had trained warriors who had gone on to become legends. And in that brief moment of eye contact with the logistics coordinator, something passed between them. Recognition, acknowledgement. The silent communion of people who share secrets too heavy for words. Then it was gone. Garrett continued walking as if nothing had happened, and Ivy followed the crowd toward her apparent humiliation. But if anyone had been watching Garrett's face as he walked away, they would have seen something that did not belong there. The faint ghost of a smile. Building 7 loomed at the edge of the training compound, a windowless concrete structure that had been designed to simulate every nightmare scenario that special operators might encounter. Inside, 12 rooms connected by corridors created a labyrinth of potential threats. Mannequin targets could be positioned in countless configurations, some representing enemies, others representing hostages or civilians. Success required not just speed, but judgment, the ability to distinguish friend from foe in the split second between seeing a target and pulling the trigger. The observation gallery above the course was already filling with spectators. Word had spread through the base with the speed that only truly entertaining humiliation could achieve. Chief Hartwell had claimed his position near the control panel, ostensibly to ensure safety protocols were followed. His expression remained unreadable. Ivy stood at the entrance to the course, a training M4 in her hands. The weapon was weighted and balanced to match its real counterpart, complete with a laser system that would register hits on the electronic targets. She had accepted it from the armorer without comment, checking the action with a smooth economy of motion that several observers noted but filed away as coincidence. "Standard rules," Lieutenant Vance announced from the observation gallery. "Clear all 12 rooms, eliminate hostile targets, avoid civilian casualties. Time limit is 90 seconds. The current record for this configuration is 43 seconds, held by Logan Pierce." Logan sketched an ironic bow from his position among the spectators. "Any questions, logistics specialist?" Ivy looked up at the gallery, her face still betraying nothing. "No, sir." "Then begin on the tone." The electronic buzzer sounded, and Ivy moved. What happened next would be discussed in whispers for years afterward, analyzed in training reviews, referenced in unofficial histories of naval special warfare. She did not run. Running created noise and compromised stability. Instead, she flowed through the entrance with a gliding speed that seemed to violate physics, her center of gravity low and stable, her weapon already rising to engagement position. The first room contained 3 targets, 2 hostiles, 1 civilian, standard configuration for introductory difficulty. Ivy's laser registered on the first hostile target before her foot had fully crossed the threshold. The second hostile dropped 0.4 seconds later. She moved past the civilian target without slowing, her weapon never even tracking toward the non-threat. In the observation gallery, Logan Pierce's confident smile began to falter. Room 2, Room 3, Room 4. Each fell to the same pattern of devastating efficiency. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no mistakes. Ivy cleared angles that the trainees had spent weeks learning to recognize, but she did not use the techniques they had been taught. Her approach was different, smoother, more economical, like watching a master calligrapher create a single perfect stroke while students struggled with basic lines. "What the—" Mason Holt trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Room 5 presented a complex scenario, 4 targets in a staggered configuration, with a civilian positioned directly in front of 1 hostile. A shot that hit the civilian would add penalty seconds. A hesitation that allowed the hostile to engage would result in failure. Ivy did not hesitate. She did not shoot through the civilian. She moved. In one fluid motion, she crossed 3 meters of open space, changed her angle by 45 degrees, and took the shot from a position that gave her a clean line on the hostile without any risk to the civilian. The entire sequence took 1.2 seconds. Chief Hartwell's hands tightened on the railing of the observation gallery. He had spent 23 years training special operators. He had worked with the best of the best, men and women who had been forged in the fires of combat and refined through thousands of hours of specialized instruction. He had never seen anyone move like that. Rooms 6 through 10 fell in rapid succession. The course designers had anticipated every possible approach, every technique that SEAL training covered. They had not anticipated this. Whatever Ivy Mercer was doing, it did not come from any manual Chief Hartwell had ever read. Room 11 presented the final complex scenario before the exit. 6 targets, 3 hostiles, 2 civilians, and 1 that could be either depending on the interpretation of its posture. This was the room that washed out promising candidates, the room that separated good operators from exceptional ones. Ivy paused at the threshold for exactly 1 second. Then she stepped inside and delivered judgment. The hostile targets registered hits in a sequence so rapid that the electronic scoring system had difficulty distinguishing individual shots. The civilians remained untouched. The ambiguous target, the one that could have been either threat or innocent, received a hit that landed precisely on the weapon it was holding. a non-lethal location that would have disabled the threat without killing a potentially innocent person. Room 12. Exit. Course complete. The electronic display flashed her time, 38 seconds. Silence in the observation gallery. Complete, absolute silence. Then Logan Pierce's voice, sounding like it came from very far away. "That's not possible. That's 5 seconds faster than my record, and she shot blindfolded better than I do with both eyes open." Nobody corrected his exaggeration. Nobody spoke at all. 43 SEAL trainees, 15 instructors, and a lieutenant who had orchestrated this supposed humiliation stood in stunned silence, watching a logistics coordinator lower her training weapon with the same calm composure she had shown while being harassed in the training yard. Mason Holt felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had been in combat simulations before. He had watched hundreds of trainees attempt this course. What he had just witnessed did not belong to any category he understood. That was not logistics training. That was not hobby shooting. That was not anything that should exist in the skill set of a woman who supposedly spent her days processing equipment requests and scheduling maintenance. What he had just watched was the work of a professional killer. Chief Hartwell's voice cut through the silence with surgical precision. "Everyone clear the observation gallery. Training resumes in 15 minutes. His eyes found Ivy's through the reinforced glass, and something passed between them. A question. An assessment. "Mercer, my office. Now." The crowd dispersed with the reluctant speed of spectators being ejected from a show that had just become impossibly interesting. Bets were being frantically recalculated. Assumptions were being violently revised. And somewhere in the chaos, Connor Walsh was fumbling with his phone, trying to compose a message to his father that would make sense of what he had just witnessed. Ivy handed the training weapon back to the armorer with a quiet word of thanks. Then she walked toward Chief Hartwell's office, her stride unchanged, her expression unchanged, as if she had done nothing more remarkable than deliver a stack of requisition forms. Fern Holloway intercepted her at the edge of the training yard. "Ma'am, that was... I don't know what that was. How did you do that?" Ivy paused, looking at the young petty officer with something that might have been appreciation. "I read a lot of manuals, petty officer." A ghost of something that could have been humor crossed her face. Some of them were very detailed. Then she was gone, following the path toward an interview that would either end her cover story or force her to create a more elaborate one. Chief Hartwell's office was spare and functional, decorated only with unit citations and photographs that chronicled a career spent in places where cameras were rarely welcome. He stood behind his desk when Ivy entered, not inviting her to sit, studying her with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to make sense. "Close the door." She complied, then stood at a relaxed parade rest, waiting. "Where did you learn that?" "Learn what, sir?" "Don't." The word came out sharp enough to cut. "Don't insult me with games, Mercer. I've been training special operators for over 2 decades. What I just watched wasn't something you pick up from recreational shooting or a casual interest in tactical procedures. That was professional-grade close-quarters work. Better than professional grade. That was elite." Ivy's expression remained neutral. "I spent some time in a previous assignment that involved security protocols. I maintained my proficiency." "What assignment?" "Your personnel file shows clerical positions and supply management. Nothing that would explain what I just saw. With respect, sir, my personnel file shows what it shows." The statement was neither confirmation nor denial. It was a wall, constructed from words that revealed nothing while appearing to answer the question. Hartwell circled his desk slowly, never taking his eyes off her. "I've met operators from every Tier 1 unit in the American military. I've trained with allies from a dozen countries. I've seen the best of the best demonstrate their craft under every imaginable condition." He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that a less disciplined person might have stepped back. "I've never seen anyone move quite like you did in that course." "I'll take that as a compliment, sir." "It wasn't meant as one. It was meant as a warning. Whatever you are, whoever you are, you're not a logistics coordinator, and whatever game you're playing on my training base, I intend to find out what it is." Something shifted in Ivy's gray eyes, just for a moment, too fast for anyone without Hartwell's experience to catch. "Chief, I'm exactly what my file says I am. If my performance on the course was above expectations, I apologize for any disruption it caused. I was trying to end a confrontation that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. By demonstrating classified-level combat capabilities in front of 40 witnesses? Sir, I would not know anything about classified capabilities. I'm just a logistics coordinator who reads a lot of manuals. Hartwell stared at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled, a sound that carried frustration and something else. Recognition, perhaps, of the futility of trying to extract truth from someone trained to withhold it. Get out of my office, Mercer, but understand this. I'm going to start asking questions, and eventually, I'm going to get answers. Understood, sir. She left the office with the same measured stride she had used to enter it, passing through the administrative building and back into the glaring Coronado sunshine. The training yard had returned to something approaching normalcy, but she could feel the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her movement. The harmless paper pusher had become something else entirely, an anomaly, a mystery, a potential threat. Lieutenant Blake Vance intercepted her near the equipment shed, falling into step beside her with practiced casualness. Quite a performance in there. Ivy did not slow her pace. I was motivated. Clearly, Vance's voice dropped, taking on a conspiratorial tone. You know, when I suggested the CQB course, I expected you to refuse. Most people in your position would have. The sensible thing would have been to file a harassment complaint and let the system handle it. The system has a lot of things to handle, Lieutenant. My minor inconvenience didn't seem worth adding to the pile. Minor inconvenience. Vance laughed softly. You were being harassed by 40 men who collectively represent the most dangerous trainees in the American military. Most people would not describe that as minor. Most people haven't experienced actual danger, sir. The statement hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that Vance seemed eager to explore. And you have experienced actual danger? Ivy stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Her gray eyes met his brown ones, and for a moment, something flickered in the space between them. Calculation? Assessment. The silent exchange of information between two people who were both more than they appeared to be. Lieutenant, I've experienced my share of challenging situations. Hasn't everyone in uniform? Some more than others. Vance smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. I pulled your file this morning, Mercer, after the incident at the weapons storage. I was curious about who would stand up to Mason Holt without flinching. And what did my file tell you? Nothing. The word carried emphasis. That's the interesting part. Your file before 2019 is almost entirely redacted. Black ink over everything that might actually explain who you are and what you're capable of. A reasonable person would have been alarmed by this revelation. A reasonable person would have demanded to know why a lieutenant was pulling personnel files without cause, or what right he had to question her background. Ivy simply nodded. The Navy has its reasons for what it classifies and what it doesn't. I trust that whoever made those decisions had good cause. Vance leaned closer, dropping his voice further. You know what happened in 2019? Operation Crimson Gate, a classified mission in Kandahar province. 12 operators went in to neutralize a high-value target. None of them came back. Officially, they're listed as missing in action. He paused, watching her face for any reaction. Unofficially, everyone in the special operations community knows that operation was a disaster, a complete loss. Ivy's expression remained perfectly neutral, not a twitch, not a flinch, not the slightest indication that the words meant anything to her at all. That sounds like a tragedy, sir. I hope their families found closure. Closure, Vance repeated the word like it was a private joke. Yes, I'm sure they did. He stepped back, returning to his normal speaking voice. Well, Mercer, you've certainly given everyone something to talk about. I imagine the stories about today's CQB run will be circulating through the base for weeks. I'd prefer they didn't, sir. I'm sure you would. Another smile that stopped at his lips. But in my experience, exceptional performances have a way of attracting attention, whether we want them to or not. He walked away, leaving Ivy standing alone in the training yard. She watched him go with an expression that, for once, showed something beyond careful neutrality. Not fear, not anger, recognition. She knew that pattern. She had seen it before. The casual questioning, the dropped references to classified operations, the implied knowledge of secrets that should have remained buried. Blake Vance was fishing for something, and the bait he was using suggested he already had a theory about what he might catch. The question was, who was he fishing for? The afternoon brought no respite from scrutiny. Word of the CQB performance had spread through the base with viral efficiency, mutating with each retelling until the logistics coordinator who had completed the course in 38 seconds became a mythical figure of increasingly absurd capabilities. By lunch, some versions of the story had her defeating multiple opponents in hand-to-hand combat. By dinner, she had apparently disarmed a bomb with nothing but a paperclip and cold efficiency. Ivy ate alone in the corner of the mess hall, as she had every day for the past 8 months. But the quality of her solitude had changed. Where before she had been invisible, now she was watched. Conversations that had flowed freely around her now dropped to whispers when she passed. People who had never noticed her existence now tracked her movements with the wary attention reserved for unexploded ordnance. Fern Holloway broke the pattern by sitting down across from her without invitation. "You don't have to do this," Ivy said quietly. "Do what?" "Associate with me. It's going to complicate your career." Fern shrugged, stabbing at her meatloaf with the enthusiastic resignation that defined military cuisine. "My career's already complicated. I'm a woman in a community that still thinks we're novelties at best and intrusions at worst. Sitting with you might actually improve my social standing." "I doubt that." "You shouldn't." Fern looked up from her food, meeting Ivy's eyes directly. "You know what I saw today, during that CQB run? I saw 40 men who have spent months learning to be dangerous realize that they were looking at something they didn't understand. And that scared them. Do you know how rare that is? These are guys who jump out of planes and swim through shark-infested waters for fun. Nothing scares them." She paused. "You scared them." Ivy considered the observation while methodically working through her own meal. "I didn't intend to scare anyone. I just wanted to end a situation that was becoming increasingly unpleasant. By demonstrating that you're apparently some kind of combat super soldier, by completing a training exercise, nothing more." Fern laughed softly. "You know, I've known you for 8 months. We've worked in the same building, passed each other in hallways, nodded at each other in meetings, and I never suspected anything. You were just background, part of the machinery that keeps this place running, invisible. That was the intention." "Was?" Ivy set down her fork. For a long moment, she simply looked at the young petty officer who had chosen curiosity over caution, connection over self-preservation. "Petty Officer Holloway, what do you actually want from this conversation? The truth would be nice, about who you are, about what you're doing here, about why someone with your capabilities would spend 8 months pushing paper and tolerating abuse from men who aren't fit to carry your gear. The truth is rarely nice. In my experience, it's usually uncomfortable, inconvenient, and occasionally dangerous." "Then give me the uncomfortable version." Ivy was silent for a long moment, weighing options that Fern could not see. Trust was a liability in her line of work. It created vulnerabilities. It left traces. It connected her to people who could be leveraged against her. But isolation was its own kind of vulnerability, and sometimes, very rarely, the right ally was worth the risk. "I can't tell you who I am," Ivy said finally. "I can't tell you what I'm doing here. I can't tell you anything about my past that might help you understand the person sitting across from you." She met Fern's eyes with an intensity that made the younger woman catch her breath. "But I can tell you this, I'm not here by accident. My presence on this base is not random. And what happened today, the CQB demonstration, was not supposed to happen. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" "I let them provoke me into revealing capabilities that should have remained hidden. And now," she glanced around the mess hall, noting the eyes that tracked her even when their owners pretended to look elsewhere. "Now I'm going to have to adapt." "Adapt to what?" The question hung unanswered as Dr. Jasper Reed approached their table. The base medical officer was a thin, nervous man with the perpetually distracted air of someone whose mind was always 3 problems ahead of his body. He clutched a medical kit to his chest like a shield. "Petty Officer Mercer, I was informed that you might have sustained minor injuries during today's training exercise. I'm here to conduct a post-activity assessment." Ivy glanced at Fern, then back at the doctor. "I wasn't aware that logistics personnel required medical screening after completing a CQB course. Standard protocol. Any personnel who engage in live-action training scenarios are subject to physical evaluation." Reed's eyes darted around the mess hall, avoiding direct contact with either woman. It should only take a few minutes. Something was wrong. Ivy could see it in the doctor's posture, in the excessive grip on his medical kit, in the way his feet were positioned for quick movement. This was not a routine medical check. This was reconnaissance. Of course, doctor, I'm always happy to comply with standard protocols. She stood, leaving her half-finished meal on the table. Fern moved to accompany her, but Ivy shook her head slightly. Stay. Finish your dinner. I'll be fine. The medical screening took place in a small examination room adjacent to the mess hall. Reed's hands trembled slightly as he prepared his instruments, a nervousness that seemed disproportionate to the routine nature of the examination. Hold out your hands, please. Ivy complied, watching the doctor's face as he examined her palms, her fingers, the network of tendons and calluses that revealed more than any personnel file ever could. His eyes widened slightly as he traced a thin scar that ran along her left thumb, a souvenir from a repelling accident that had occurred in a place where she officially had never been. That's an interesting scar pattern, Reed observed, his voice carefully neutral. How did you acquire it? Kitchen accident. Years ago. I was teaching myself to cook and got careless with a knife. The lie was smooth, practiced, utterly unconvincing to anyone who knew what they were looking at. Reed clearly knew. His examination became more detailed, more searching, cataloging every mark on her hands as if compiling evidence for a case he had not yet decided to pursue. Please remove your outer garment. I need to check for impact bruising from the course equipment. Ivy hesitated. The logistics uniform she wore covered most of her body, hiding evidence that no fabricated history could explain. Scars from battles that never appeared in official records. Muscle definition that no clerical worker would possess. And on her right shoulder, concealed beneath layers of fabric. Is that strictly necessary, doctor? Standard protocol. But his eyes said something different. His eyes said, I know you're hiding something. I want to see what it is. I'd prefer to keep my uniform on. There's no bruising that requires evaluation. Reed's hands tightened on his instruments. Petty Officer Mercer, I must insist. Medical evaluations are not optional on this base. Then I'll decline the evaluation and accept whatever documentation that generates. A standoff. The doctor clearly wanted something more than a routine medical check. Equally clearly, he lacked the authority to compel her cooperation. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Reed exhaled, setting down his instruments with visible frustration. Very well. I'll note in my report that you declined portions of the standard examination. Note whatever you feel is appropriate, doctor. She left the examination room with the uncomfortable awareness that she had just created another loose thread. Another question mark in a cover story that was developing far too many punctuation errors. The shadows were lengthening across the base by the time she made her way back to her quarters. The administrative building that housed logistics personnel was quiet at this hour, most of its occupants either finishing dinner or preparing for evening recreation. Ivy climbed the stairs to the second floor, with the automatic vigilance that had become second nature, noting exit routes and potential ambush points without conscious effort. Her room was small and Spartan. A single bed, a desk with a computer terminal, a closet containing 4 identical uniforms and nothing else. No photographs, no personal items, no trace of the life that had existed before she became Ivy Mercer, logistics coordinator. She closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, allowing the mask she had worn all day to slip slightly. The CQB course had been a mistake, a serious one. Months of careful work, of building a cover identity that would withstand scrutiny, potentially compromised by a single moment of pride. No, not pride, something else. She had watched Mason Holt's boot connect with her clipboard, and something inside her had shifted, some remnant of the person she had been before the cover, before the mission, before the long months of pretending to be less than she was. That person had refused to accept humiliation quietly. That person had wanted them to see what they were really dealing with. It was a weakness, one that could cost lives if she did not get it under control. Her secure phone buzzed, a text message from a number that would not appear in any directory. 2 words, status update. She typed her response, cover compromised, situation developing, require guidance. The reply came 30 seconds later, continue mission, identify primary target, extraction authorized upon completion. She deleted the exchange and returned the phone to its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard. Continue mission. As if nothing had changed, as if she had not just painted a target on her back visible to everyone on the base, but orders were orders. And somewhere in this compound of warriors and trainees, among the instructors and administrators and support staff who kept America's deadliest military unit functioning, there was a leak. Someone feeding information to enemies who would use it to kill American operators in the field. Ivy Mercer had been placed here to find that leak. And nothing, not blown cover, not suspicious doctors, not 40 hostile trainees who had just realized she was not what she appeared to be, was going to stop her from completing that mission. She reached beneath her pillow and retrieved a photograph that she had carried through more assignments than she could remember. 12 faces stared back at her, men and women who had trusted her, who had followed her into darkness, who had not come back. One face stood out from the rest, Sergeant Elijah Mercer, same last name, same gray eyes, her brother, the man whose death had transformed her from an operator into something else entirely. "I'm getting closer," she whispered to the photograph. "I promised I'd find out who betrayed us. I'm keeping that promise." She replaced the photograph beneath her pillow and lay back on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while her mind processed the day's developments. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new scrutiny, new opportunities to make mistakes that could prove fatal. But tomorrow would also bring new opportunities to identify the traitor who had cost her everything that mattered. And when she found them, no amount of rank, no weight of connections, no shield of bureaucratic protection would save them from the reckoning that was coming. Morning arrived with the sharp clarity that characterized Coronado weather, bright sun cutting through cool ocean air to illuminate a base already humming with activity. Ivy had slept poorly, her dreams populated by faces that no longer existed outside of memory, but she rose at 0500 hours, as she had every morning for the past 8 months. Routine was cover, routine was camouflage, routine was the difference between a logistics coordinator who happened to have unusual skills and an operator who was actively hunting a traitor within the special operations community. The mess hall was already occupied when she arrived, earlier risers who took their physical training seriously enough to fuel properly before pushing their bodies to extremes. She collected her breakfast with the automatic movements of long practice and found her usual corner table. She had barely begun eating when Logan Pierce appeared. "Mind if I sit?" The question was delivered without the mockery that had characterized their previous interactions. His blue eyes held something different now, not respect exactly, more like the cautious assessment that one predator gives another when their territories unexpectedly overlap. "Free country, sir." He slid into the seat across from her, setting down a tray that contained the calorie-dense nutrition that third phase demanded. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I ran that CQB course 73 times before I set the record," Logan said finally. 73 attempts, thousands of hours of training. "And you beat my time on what appeared to be your first try." Ivy continued eating, offering no response. "That's not normal. That's not even exceptional. That's something else entirely." He leaned forward, dropping his voice. "Who trained you?" "I told Chief Hartwell. I read a lot of manuals." "No manual teaches what you did in there. I've read every manual that exists. I've trained with people who wrote the manuals, and I've never seen anyone move the way you move." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "It's like watching water flow downhill. Natural, inevitable, like you've done it so many times that your body doesn't even need your brain to participate anymore. Muscle memory develops with practice. I practice occasionally." "You practice what?" "Because whatever it is, it's not standard firearms training." Ivy set down her fork and met his eyes directly. "Petty Officer Pierce, what do you actually want?" The directness seemed to throw him off balance. Whatever he had been expecting, it was not this calm, measured challenge from a woman who should have been intimidated by his attention. "I want to understand. Yesterday you were a paper pusher. Today you're something else. I want to know which version is real." "Why does it matter?" "Because I'm supposed to become one of the best special operators in the world. And in less than 40 seconds, you demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything I've achieved, despite years of focused training." He spread his hands, a gesture that conveyed genuine confusion. "If there's something I'm missing, something that could make me better at what I do, I want to know about it." Ivy considered his words. Beneath the competitive instinct and bruised ego, she could detect something else, genuine curiosity, perhaps even the seed of humility. For all his golden boy reputation, Logan Pierce wanted to learn. It was an impulse she could work with. "The difference isn't technique," she said carefully. Your technique is textbook, precise, well-drilled. Then what is it? Purpose. She picked up her fork again, spearing a piece of scrambled egg. You train to be excellent. You train to beat records. You train to prove yourself. She paused, meeting his eyes. I train to survive. The words landed with impact that Logan clearly felt. His expression shifted, some of the competitive edge softening into something more contemplative. Survive what? That's not a conversation for the mess hall, petty officer. She stood, collecting her tray. But I'll leave you with this. Excellence is a worthy goal, but it's not the same as effectiveness. And in the situations that actually matter, effectiveness is what keeps you and your teammates alive. She walked away before he could respond, depositing her tray and exiting the mess hall with the same measured pace she had maintained throughout the conversation. Behind her, Logan Pierce sat alone with his breakfast and his thoughts, wrestling with the uncomfortable possibility that his entire approach to becoming a warrior had been missing something fundamental. The morning brought more challenges. Chief Hartwell had clearly not abandoned his questions from the previous day. When Ivy arrived at the logistics office to begin her shift, she found a message waiting on her terminal. Mandatory physical assessment. 0900 hours. Main training ground. The message carried Hartwell's authorization code. Declining would be possible, but it would raise more questions than compliance. Better to go along, to demonstrate just enough capability to explain her previous performance while keeping enough in reserve to maintain the fiction of her cover. At 0900, she reported to the main training ground to find an audience already assembled. Word had spread. The logistics coordinator who had embarrassed the third phase trainees was going to be tested again. And this time, the testing would be thorough. Hartwell stood at the center of the training area, his arms crossed and his expression grim. Beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable, was Commander Delilah Hayes. The commander's presence was unexpected. Hayes was in charge of training oversight, a position that would not normally involve individual personnel assessments. Petty Officer Mercer, Hartwell began without preamble, your performance on yesterday's CQB course raised questions that require answers. This assessment will determine whether those questions should be escalated to a formal investigation or attributed to unusual but innocent circumstances. Understood, sir. We'll begin with standard physical benchmarks: push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, timed run. Following that, we'll conduct expanded evaluation of specific skills that your CQB performance suggests you may possess. The physical benchmarks were the easy part. Ivy completed them with scores that were excellent for a woman in her official position, but deliberately below the levels that would suggest operator-grade fitness. Enough to explain her CQB success as exceptional natural ability, not enough to suggest professional military conditioning. The expanded evaluation was more complicated. Hartwell had set up a series of stations designed to test capabilities that went beyond standard fitness. Situational awareness assessments, reaction time measurements, pattern recognition under stress. Each station required Ivy to make decisions about how much of her true ability to reveal. She performed well, too well for a logistics coordinator, but not so well that her results screamed black operations. A careful calibration that she hoped would satisfy Hartwell's suspicions without confirming them. The final station was hand-to-hand combat assessment. Commander Hayes will serve as your training partner for this exercise, Hartwell announced. Standard defensive techniques only. The goal is to assess your ability to protect yourself in a physical confrontation. Hayes stepped forward, her expression complex. Unlike Hartwell, she seemed less interested in evaluating Ivy than in communicating something that words could not convey. Her eyes held questions that went beyond the assessment. They faced each other on the training mat. Hayes was taller, with longer reach and better leverage, a straightforward matchup that should favor the commander significantly. Begin when ready, Hartwell ordered. Hayes moved first, a standard forward approach that any competent self-defense student would recognize. Ivy responded with textbook defensive technique, redirecting the commander's momentum without counterattacking. Clean, efficient, unremarkable. They cycled through several exchanges, each following the same pattern. Hayes would initiate, Ivy would defend. Neither would escalate beyond the bounds of the assessment. But on the fourth exchange, something changed. Hayes's approach shifted, becoming faster, more technical, more aggressive. This was not the attack of a training partner going through the motions. This was the attack of someone who wanted to see what Ivy could really do. Ivy had a choice. She could continue the pretense, allow herself to be taken down in a demonstration that would reinforce her cover as a competent but unremarkable logistics coordinator. Or she could respond to Hayes's escalation with capability that would raise every red flag on the base. She chose something in between. Her response was faster than her previous movements, more fluid, more precise. But it was not the devastating efficiency she had shown in the CQB course. It was something measured, controlled, the performance of someone who was better than she had been pretending, but not as good as she actually was. She put Hayes on the mat with a technique that was impressive but explainable. Hayes looked up at her from the ground, breathing hard, and Ivy saw recognition in the commander's eyes. Not surprised that she had been beaten. Recognition of the careful calibration that had determined how thoroughly she had been beaten. She knows, Ivy realized, not everything, but she knows I'm holding back. Hartwell's expression was harder to read. He had clearly expected more from the assessment. The logistics coordinator's performance had been notable, but not conclusive. She was better than she should have been, but not so much better that her official status could be challenged. "Assessment complete," he announced. "Results will be documented and reviewed by appropriate authority." The crowd began to disperse, spectators returning to their training schedules with the disappointed air of an audience that had not gotten the show they expected. But as Ivy prepared to leave the training ground, she felt a hand on her arm. Commander Hayes, standing closer than professional courtesy normally allowed, pitched her voice for Ivy's ears alone. "Kandahar, I lost people there too." The words hit like a physical blow. Ivy kept her face neutral, but something in her stillness must have communicated impact. "I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am." "Yes, you do." Hayes's grip tightened fractionally, then released. "I thought you were dead. We all did. When the reports came in about Crimson Gate," she stopped, collected herself. "We should talk. Somewhere private. Somewhere away from the surveillance that's been following you since yesterday." Ivy's mind raced. Hayes knew. How much she could not determine. But the commander clearly had information that went beyond suspicion into certainty. The question was whether she represented threat or opportunity. "Commander, I appreciate your concern, but I don't think 2200 hours, the observation point overlooking the ocean. You'll know which one." Hayes stepped back, resuming professional distance. "Think about it, Ivy. You've been alone for a long time. It doesn't have to stay that way." She walked away before Ivy could respond, leaving behind questions that multiplied faster than answers. The afternoon brought no clarity. Ivy went through the motions of her logistics duties, processing equipment requests and scheduling maintenance with the same methodical efficiency she had demonstrated for 8 months. But her mind was elsewhere, processing variables and calculating probabilities in the way that had kept her alive through situations that should have killed her. Hayes knew. That much was certain. Whether her knowledge was official or personal, whether she represented an ally or a threat, those questions remained unanswered. Blake Vance knew or suspected. His questions about Operation Crimson Gate suggested familiarity with classified operations that a training lieutenant should not possess. Hartwell knew something was wrong, even if he could not identify exactly what, and the entire base was now watching her with the kind of attention that made covert operations extremely difficult to conduct. Her mission had become more complicated, but it had not become impossible. The traitor was still here. The leak that had cost her team their lives was still operating, still feeding information to enemies, still putting American operators at risk. Finding them had become harder, but finding them had not become optional. At 1900 hours, as the base began transitioning to evening routines, she made her decision. Whatever Hayes knew, whatever she wanted, ignoring her overture would create more problems than engaging with it. Better to control the conversation than to let uncertainty fester. At 21:45 hours, she slipped out of her quarters and made her way toward the observation point that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The path was familiar. She had walked it many times during her 8 months on base, always maintaining the appearance of a logistics coordinator who enjoyed evening walks to clear her head. Hayes was already there when she arrived, standing at the railing and watching the moonlight play across the waves. She turned at the sound of Ivy's approach, her face silver in the dim illumination. "You came. You knew something that suggested I should. I knew a lot of things." Hayes turned back to the ocean. "I served with your brother. Did you know that? 8 years ago, before either of us got into the really dark stuff. He was the best operator I'd ever worked with. Until I met you." Ivy moved to stand beside her at the railing, maintaining enough distance to react if the situation turned hostile. What do you want, Commander? To help. To understand. To maybe find some closure for what happened at Kandahar. Hayes's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I know you're not just here to push papers, Ivy. I know Crimson Gate didn't end the way the official reports claim. And I know that someone on this base is responsible for what happened to your team. Ivy's hands tightened on the railing. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious situation. Hayes turned to face her directly. 3 months ago, I was contacted by Naval Intelligence. They'd identified irregularities in communication patterns originating from this base. Encrypted transmissions that shouldn't exist, going to destinations that definitely shouldn't be receiving them. Someone is leaking operational information, and they've been doing it for years. And they sent you here to investigate? They sent me here to observe. They sent someone else to investigate. Hayes's eyes met hers meaningfully. Someone who had personal motivation to find the truth, no matter what it cost. Ivy absorbed the implications. Her mission was not as secret as she had believed. Naval Intelligence had been aware of her deployment, had positioned Hayes as oversight, had constructed a more elaborate operation than she had been told about. Why are you telling me this? Because you are compromised. The CQB course, the assessment today, the questions that everyone is asking, your cover is falling apart. If you continue operating alone, you're going to get yourself killed. Or worse, you're going to spook the traitor into going dark before we can identify them. And your alternative is? Coordination. We work together, share information, combine resources. Between your skills and my authority, we have a much better chance of finding this leak and stopping it. Ivy considered the offer. It made tactical sense. Hayes had access and authority that she lacked, but it also created vulnerabilities. If Hayes was not what she appeared to be, if she was part of the conspiracy rather than opposition to it, trusting her could be fatal. How do I know you're telling the truth? Hayes smiled, a tired expression that carried the weight of years spent in shadows. You don't. That's the nature of our work. You take calculated risks based on incomplete information and hope you're not wrong. She reached into her pocket and produced a small object. But maybe this will help. It was a challenge coin, unit insignia on one side. On the other, a phrase in Latin, per umbras ad lucem, through shadows to light, the motto of Ghost Unit 7. Ivy's breath caught in her throat. She had one just like it, hidden in her quarters, a memento of a unit that officially had never existed. Where did you get that? Your brother gave it to me, the night before he shipped out to Kandahar. Hayes's voice softened. He told me to give it to you if anything happened to him. I've been carrying it for 2 years, waiting for the chance. Ivy took the coin with hands that trembled slightly, despite her training. The metal was warm from Hayes's body heat, solid and real, in a way that documentation and verbal assurances could never be. Eli, he mentioned you constantly. His little sister who was better than him at everything but too stubborn to admit it. His little sister who was going to change the world if the world didn't change her first. Hayes placed a hand on Ivy's shoulder. He was proud of you, Ivy. So proud. And he would have wanted you to know that you're not alone in this. For a moment, just a moment, the mask that Ivy had worn for 2 years slipped. The grief she had contained, the rage she had channeled, the loss she had never fully processed, all of it surged to the surface before she could force it back down. She had been alone for so long, fighting alone, grieving alone, hunting alone. The possibility of having an ally, someone who understood what she had lost and why she had to find the truth, was almost too much to process. The traitor, she said finally, her voice rough. I have suspicions, but nothing concrete. So do I. Hayes withdrew her hand, returning to professional mode. And I think it's time we compared notes. But not here, not now, too many eyes, even at this hour. She glanced around the observation point with the practiced awareness of someone who had learned to assume surveillance. Tomorrow, I'll arrange a secure location and contact you through channels. Commander Delilah. If we're going to work together, you might as well use my name. Delilah. The name felt strange in her mouth, after months of maintaining professional distance from everyone on the base. Thank you for the coin, for everything. Hayes nodded and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ivy alone with the ocean and the moonlight, and a challenge coin that connected her to a past she had been trying to outrun for 2 years. She stood at the railing for a long time, watching the waves and thinking about brothers and betrayals and the long road that still stretched ahead. The mission had become more complicated, but it had also become more possible. She was not alone anymore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new dangers, new opportunities to make mistakes that could prove fatal. But tomorrow would also bring something she had not allowed herself to feel since the day she buried the last member of her team in a grave that would never receive official recognition. Hope. The night that followed was restless. Ivy lay in her narrow bed, turning Hayes's challenge coin over and over in her fingers, thinking about Elijah and Kandahar and the chain of events that had led her to this moment. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by memories that felt more like wounds than recollections. At 0400 hours, she gave up on rest and rose to prepare for the day. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror in her quarters was tired, older than her 32 years, marked by experiences that no personnel file could capture. She dressed in her logistics uniform with the same methodical precision she had employed for 8 months. Whatever the day brought, maintaining the appearance of normalcy was still essential. The cover might be compromised, but it was not yet abandoned. Breakfast in the mess hall brought immediate confirmation that her situation had not improved overnight. Mason Holt was already there when she arrived, and his expression upon seeing her carried a complex mixture of emotions that defied easy categorization. Anger, certainly. Humiliation from the CQB course that had made him look like a bully who had chosen the wrong target, but also something else, something that might have been grudging respect, or perhaps fear. He did not approach her. Neither did any of the other trainees. The harassment that had been so open the previous day had transformed into something more subtle. Averted gazes, whispered conversations that stopped when she drew near, the particular isolation that came from being recognized as dangerous without being understood. Fern Holloway joined her at her corner table, with the casual determination of someone who had decided that social consequences were less important than curiosity. "You look like you didn't sleep. Busy night." "Doing what?" "The logistics office closes at 1700. Ivy managed a small smile. "Reading manuals." Fern laughed, but her eyes remained serious. "You know, that excuse is getting thinner every time you use it. Pretty soon, you're going to have to come up with something more creative." "I'll work on that." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Fern spoke again. "Something's happening. I can feel it. The whole base has been different since your CQB run. Like everyone's waiting for something, but nobody knows what." Ivy considered her response carefully. Fern was genuinely kind, which made her valuable, but she was also perceptive, which made her potentially dangerous. The line between ally and liability was thinner than most people realized. "Change makes people nervous," she said finally. "When their assumptions get challenged, they start looking for explanations. Sometimes they find the right ones. Sometimes they create stories that make more sense than the truth. And what's the truth about you?" Ivy met her eyes directly. "The truth is that I'm someone who has learned that helping people requires more than good intentions. It requires capability. And sometimes, capability looks threatening to people who thought they were the only capable ones in the room." Fern absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "That's either the most honest thing you've said since I've known you, or the most carefully constructed deflection I've ever heard. Maybe it's both." Before the conversation could continue, a commotion at the mess hall entrance drew their attention. 3 Navy MPs had entered the building, their presence immediately notable in a facility where military police were an uncommon sight. They scanned the room with professional efficiency before heading directly toward a table near the windows. Lieutenant Blake Vance looked up from his breakfast as the MPs approached. His expression shifted rapidly through surprise, concern, and finally, carefully controlled neutrality. "Lieutenant Vance, you need to come with us." The room fell silent. Whatever conversations had been underway stopped mid-sentence as every eye turned toward the tableau unfolding near the windows. "May I ask what this is about?" Vance's voice was steady, but Ivy could detect the tension beneath it. "We're not authorized to discuss details in a public setting, sir. If you'll come with us voluntarily, we can proceed more efficiently." Vance stood slowly, gathering his composure with visible effort. "Of course, I'm always happy to cooperate with legitimate inquiries." He straightened his uniform and walked toward the door, flanked by the MPs, maintaining the appearance of someone who had nothing to hide. But as he passed Ivy's table, his eyes found hers. And in that brief moment of contact, she saw something that changed everything. recognition, calculation, and fear. Not the fear of someone innocent who had been wrongly accused, the fear of someone guilty who had just realized their time was running out. He knows, she thought. He knows I'm the reason this is happening. The MPs escorted Vance out of the mess hall, and the moment the door closed behind them, the room erupted in speculation. Officers and trainees alike traded theories about what could possibly require military police involvement with a training lieutenant. Accusations of theft, security violations, conduct unbecoming. None of them guessed the truth. What was that about? Fern asked, her eyes wide. Ivy stood, collecting her tray with hands that remained perfectly steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. I don't know, but I think we're about to find out. The morning brought more revelations. By 0900 hours, word had spread through the base that Lieutenant Vance had been taken to a secure facility for questioning. The nature of the inquiry remained officially unknown, but rumors filled the vacuum with increasingly dramatic speculation. By noon, the consensus had settled on espionage, though the details varied wildly depending on who was telling the story. Ivy went through the motions of her logistics duties, while her mind processed the implications of Vance's detention. Hayes had moved faster than expected, or naval intelligence had decided that waiting was no longer an option. Either way, the operation she had spent 8 months building toward was accelerating beyond her control. At 1400 hours, she received a message through official channels. Report to Commander Hayes' office immediately. The walk across the base felt longer than usual. She was aware of being watched, not just with the general curiosity that had followed her since the CQB course, but with the specific attention of people who sensed that something significant was unfolding. Hayes' office was located in the administrative building that housed training oversight operations. Unlike Chief Hartwell's spare functional space, this room showed signs of personality. Books on military history lining one wall, photographs from various deployments on another, and a small collection of challenge coins displayed in a case near the window. Hayes was not alone when Ivy entered. Chief Hartwell stood near the bookshelf, his expression complex. And seated in the visitor's chair, looking like he was trying to disappear into the upholstery, was Connor Walsh. "Close the door, Petty Officer Mercer," Hayes ordered. Ivy complied, taking a position that gave her sightlines to all 3 occupants while maintaining access to the exit. At 0800 this morning, Lieutenant Blake Vance was taken into custody pending investigation for suspected espionage and related charges. Hayes' voice was flat, professional, revealing nothing of the previous night's conversation. During the preliminary interview, he made several statements that require verification from personnel on this base. Connor Walsh looked like he was going to be sick. His aristocratic features had gone pale, and his hands were clenched in his lap with white-knuckled intensity. Among those statements, Hayes continued, was a claim that Petty Officer Walsh had knowledge of certain communication irregularities and chose not to report them. "That's not true," Connor's voice cracked with desperation. "I didn't know anything. He was just making conversation. I didn't know what he was actually doing." "What did you think he was doing?" Hartwell's question cut like a blade. "When a fellow officer asks you about communication protocols and security procedures outside the scope of his duties, what did you think he was doing?" Connor's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The golden boy who had threatened Ivy with his father's influence just 2 days ago had been reduced to a terrified young man facing the possibility that his career, his freedom, and his family's reputation were all about to implode. "Petty Officer Walsh's father has been notified," Hayes said. "Rear Admiral Walsh is currently en route to this facility to participate in his son's interview." The implications of that statement settled over the room like a weighted blanket. Whatever questions existed about Connor's involvement, they had escalated to a level that required flag officer attention. This was no longer a simple case of a junior officer making mistakes. This was a potential scandal that reached into the highest ranks of the naval hierarchy. "Why am I here?" Ivy asked, breaking the silence. Hayes and Hartwell exchanged glances. Some communication passed between them that Ivy could not decode. "Lieutenant Vance mentioned you specifically in his initial statements," Hayes replied. "He claimed that your presence on this base was connected to a classified intelligence operation. He suggested that your cover as a logistics coordinator was part of an effort to identify personnel engaging in unauthorized communications." Connor's head snapped toward Ivy, his eyes wide with dawning comprehension. You're actually..." Petty Officer Mercer's status is not your concern, Hartwell cut in sharply. Your concern is answering questions truthfully and completely and hoping that your cooperation mitigates whatever consequences your poor judgment has earned. I want a lawyer. The demand came out more as a plea than a statement. You'll have access to legal counsel once we complete this preliminary interview. Until then, we need to establish the basic facts of your involvement. Hayes turned back to Ivy. Petty Officer Mercer, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need you to answer honestly. Were you placed on this base specifically to investigate suspected security breaches? The question was a trap with no safe exit. Denying the truth would undermine any future testimony. Confirming it in front of Connor Walsh would compromise operational security. But Hayes had constructed the scenario deliberately, forcing Ivy's hand while providing plausible deniability. Commander, my presence on this base is the result of standard assignment procedures through Naval Personnel Command. Hayes nodded, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. Of course. Thank you for clarifying. She turned to Connor. Petty Officer Walsh, you've heard Petty Officer Mercer's statement. Do you have any information that contradicts it? No, I don't know anything. Then we're done here. Hayes stood, signaling the end of the interview. Chief Hartwell will escort you to a holding area where you'll wait for your father's arrival. I suggest you use that time to carefully consider everything you know, everything you suspect, and everything you've been told. Honesty at this stage could make a significant difference in how your situation is ultimately resolved. Connor left the office with Hartwell, looking like a condemned man walking toward execution. The door closed behind them, and Hayes's professional demeanor immediately softened. That was necessary, she said quietly. Connor is a fool, but he's not the traitor. He was being cultivated. Vance saw potential in his family connections and started grooming him as an asset. Another year, maybe 2, and Connor would have been in too deep to escape without prison time. You're giving him a chance. I'm giving him a choice. Same thing I'm giving you. Hayes moved to the window, looking out at the base that sprawled beneath them. Vance talked. Not everything, but enough to confirm our suspicions. He was feeding information to foreign intelligence services through a network of intermediaries. Operational details, training schedules, personnel movements, anything he could access. Kandahar? Hayes was silent for a long moment. We don't know yet. He hasn't admitted to involvement in Crimson Gate, but the timing matches. The communication patterns match. If he wasn't directly responsible, he was connected to whoever was. Ivy felt something cold settle in her chest. After 2 years of hunting, she was finally close to the truth. Close to knowing who had betrayed her team. Close to understanding why 12 people who trusted her had been sent into an ambush from which only she had returned. What happens now? Now we dig deeper. Vance is cooperating to a point, but he's holding back. He's protecting someone, or multiple someones. Whatever network he was part of extends beyond one training lieutenant with access to classified information. Hayes turned to face her. This is where it gets complicated, Ivy. The people Vance was working with, they're going to know he's been compromised. If they have other assets on this base, those assets are going to start covering their tracks. Or worse, they might try to eliminate loose ends. Including me. Including you. Including anyone who might be able to identify additional members of the network. Hayes moved to her desk and pulled a file from a locked drawer. Which is why I'm officially changing your status. Effective immediately, you're no longer Logistics Coordinator Ivy Mercer. You're operational advisor to this command pending completion of the current investigation. Operational advisor? It's a fiction, but it's a useful one. It gives you official standing to participate in the investigation. It provides cover for capabilities that are no longer secret. And it puts you under my direct authority, which means anyone who wants to get to you has to go through me first. Ivy absorbed the implications. The cover she had maintained for 8 months was officially dead. Whatever anonymity she had possessed was gone, but in its place she had been given something potentially more valuable, legitimacy and protection. The trainees, she said, Mason, Logan, the others, they saw what I can do. They're going to ask questions. Let them ask. Your skills are now officially attributed to prior service in a specialized training unit. Close enough to the truth to be believable, far enough from it to protect actual classified information. Hayes handed her the file. This contains what we know about Vance's network. Suspected contacts, communication patterns, financial transactions. Study it. Look for connections I might have missed. You've been inside this base for 8 months. You've seen things I haven't. Your perspective might make the difference. Ivy took the file, feeling its weight as both physical object and metaphorical burden. After 2 years of operating alone, she was finally part of something larger. A coordinated effort with resources and authority that her solo mission had lacked. But with that support came new responsibilities, new vulnerabilities, and the increasingly uncomfortable awareness that the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous her position became. "There's one more thing," Hayes said, her voice dropping. "When Vance was questioned about how he identified you as a potential threat, he mentioned something interesting. He said someone warned him, someone on this base who recognized you from before, someone who knew what you really were." Ivy's blood ran cold. Who? He wouldn't say. Or couldn't. But Ivy... Hayes met her eyes with deadly seriousness. "There's someone else here who knows your real identity. And they're not on our side." The revelation transformed everything Ivy had understood about her situation. She had assumed that her compromised cover was the result of her own mistake, the CQB demonstration that had revealed capabilities she should have kept hidden. But if Vance had been warned before that, if someone on the base had recognized her, then she was not the hunter. She was the prey. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Ivy retreated to a secure room that Hayes had arranged, spreading the contents of the intelligence file across a table, and immersing herself in the details of Blake Vance's suspected network. The picture that emerged was simultaneously better and worse than she had feared. Better because the network appeared to be small, perhaps a dozen individuals spread across multiple bases and installations. Worse because those individuals occupied positions of significant access. Administrative officers, communications specialists, supply chain managers. The kind of personnel who were often overlooked, but who controlled the flow of information that special operations depended upon. One name appeared repeatedly in the communication analysis. Walsh, not Connor, his father. Rear Admiral Douglas Walsh had been CC'd on encrypted communications that had no legitimate purpose flowing through his inbox. The timestamps coincided with operational planning periods for missions that had subsequently encountered unexpected complications, including Crimson Gate. Ivy stared at the data, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were telling her. A flag officer, a Rear Admiral, a man with decades of distinguished service and a reputation that had never been seriously questioned. If Walsh was dirty, the implications extended far beyond one compromised operation. They reached into the fundamental integrity of the special operations community itself. A knock at the door interrupted her analysis. She secured the files before responding. "Enter." Master Chief Noah Garrett stepped inside, closing the door behind him with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that walls had ears. "We need to talk." Ivy nodded toward the chair across the table. "I was wondering when you'd make contact." "You knew?" "I suspected. Your reaction when we passed each other yesterday, before the CQB course. You recognized me." Garrett settled into the chair with the economy of movement that marked career operators. "I served with your brother. Different team, same theater. We crossed paths enough for me to know the Mercer family trademark." He tapped to the corner of his eye. The eyes. Same color, same intensity, same way of looking at things, like you're calculating threat levels and exit strategies simultaneously. "When did you realize?" "About 3 months after you arrived. I was reviewing security footage for a completely unrelated matter and caught you in the background of one of the shots. The way you move through a crowded corridor, automatically clearing lines of sight, tracking potential threats. It's not something you can train out of yourself. And you didn't report it. I reported it to the people who needed to know. Commander Hayes, a contact at Naval Intelligence who I trust with my life." Garrett's expression shifted to something harder. "I also ran my own investigation into why a Ghost Unit 7 survivor would be assigned to logistics duty at a SEAL training facility. The answers I found suggested that official channels might not be entirely reliable." Ivy leaned forward. "What did you find?" "That your assignment here wasn't random. That someone in the personnel chain specifically requested you for this posting, and that the same someone has connections to patterns of communication that shouldn't exist." Garrett paused, weighing his next words. "I think you're being set up, Mercer. I think someone brought you here specifically so they could identify you, confirm your survival, and arrange for your permanent silence." The theory matched too many data points to dismiss. Her assignment to Coronado, the harassment that had pushed her toward the CQB course, Blake Vance's questions about her background, The warning he had received before her cover was visibly compromised. "Walsh," she said quietly. "Maybe, probably. But Walsh is too smart to act directly. He'd use intermediaries, cutouts, people who can be sacrificed if things go wrong." Garrett's eyes met hers. People like Lieutenant Vance. Or people like his son. Connor's being set up by his own father? Connor's been positioned as a potential fall guy since he was assigned to this base. His father pulled strings to get him into third-phase training despite marginal qualifications. His father arranged for him to have access to facilities and personnel that trainees normally wouldn't encounter. And now, his father is rushing here to participate in his son's interview. Garrett's voice carried a bitter edge. Participate, meaning control the narrative, meaning ensure that whatever Connor knows, whatever he might reveal, gets filtered through channels that protect the real operation. Ivy's hands clenched on the table. The investigation had become exponentially more complicated. She was not just hunting for a traitor anymore. She was potentially trying to expose a flag officer who had spent decades building networks of protection and influence. "Hayes needs to know this," she said. "Hayes suspects, but she doesn't have the evidence to move against a rear admiral without solid proof. Walsh is protected by rank, by reputation, by connections that reach into places that make people nervous about asking hard questions." Garrett stood, moving toward the door. "That's where you come in, Mercer. You're the survivor. You're the one person who might be able to identify something from Crimson Gate that connects directly to Walsh, something he couldn't anticipate, something he couldn't prepare a defense against. My testimony about an operation that officially never happened? No court would admit it. Courts aren't the only way to handle situations like this." Garrett's expression carried implications that went far beyond legal proceedings. Sometimes the system needs to be bypassed. Sometimes the only justice available is the kind that doesn't require paperwork. He left before she could respond, closing the door behind him with the same careful deliberation he had used to enter. Ivy sat alone in the secure room, surrounded by evidence of a conspiracy that reached higher than she had ever imagined, and contemplated the choice that Garrett had just outlined: official channels or unofficial methods, legitimate investigation or direct action. Justice through systems that Walsh had spent decades corrupting, or justice outside those systems entirely. The decision would define not just her mission, but her soul. Evening arrived with no resolution to the questions that churned through Ivy's mind. She had spent hours analyzing the intelligence file, cross-referencing communication patterns with operational timelines, building a picture that became more damning with each connection she discovered. Rear Admiral Walsh had been present at planning meetings for 7 operations that had subsequently encountered unexpected complications. 3 of those operations had resulted in significant casualties. One of them was Crimson Gate, but presence was not proof. Correlation was not causation. Without direct evidence connecting Walsh to the intelligence leaks, the case remained circumstantial at best. At 1900 hours, she received a message through the secure communication system Hayes had provided. Main training ground. Immediately. The base was quieter than usual when she emerged from the administrative building. Third-phase training had been suspended pending the investigation, and the normal sounds of physical exertion and shouted commands were absent. Instead, an unusual tension hung in the air, the feeling of a community waiting for news that would change everything. The main training ground was not empty. A helicopter sat on the central pad, rotors still spinning down. Standing beside it, in dress uniform that carried more ribbons than Ivy could count, was Rear Admiral Douglas Walsh. He looked exactly like the photographs in his official file, tall, distinguished, with the silver hair and weathered features of someone who had spent a career commanding respect. His posture radiated authority. His expression carried the controlled concern of a father rushing to his son's aid. But his eyes, when they found Ivy across the training ground, held something else entirely: recognition and satisfaction. Hayes stood nearby, her posture professional, but her face tight with tension. Chief Hartwell flanked her, along with 2 Navy MPs and 3 officers Ivy did not recognize. The configuration suggested an official welcome for a flag officer, but the undercurrent was wrong. Too tense, too watchful. Walsh crossed the distance between them with measured steps, his gaze never leaving Ivy's face. "So, this is the logistics coordinator who has caused so much excitement." His voice was smooth, cultured, carrying generations of privilege and power. "I've heard remarkable things about your CQB performance. Quite impressive for someone with your official background. Ivy met his gaze without flinching. "Thank you, sir. Of course, your official background isn't quite complete, is it?" Walsh's smile did not reach his eyes. "There are certain gaps in your personnel file, certain periods that seem to have been edited." "I'm not aware of any gaps, sir." "No? How interesting." Walsh turned to Hayes, his tone shifting to the brisk efficiency of command. "Commander, I understand my son is being held for questioning regarding security matters. I'd like to see him immediately." "Admiral, with respect, Petty Officer Walsh is currently in a secure interview setting. Protocol requires that a flag officer have access to personnel under their cognizance when circumstances warrant. My son is a minor participant in whatever situation has developed here. His involvement is almost certainly the result of manipulation by Lieutenant Vance, who has clearly been using junior personnel to further his own agenda." Walsh's voice hardened. "I want to see my son, Commander. Now." The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Hayes had the authority to refuse, but doing so would create a conflict with an admiral that could have severe career consequences. Walsh was counting on that calculus, counting on the deference that his rank automatically commanded. Ivy stepped forward. "Sir, if I may?" Walsh's attention snapped back to her, surprise flickering across his features before he controlled it. "Your concern for your son is understandable, but the investigation into Lieutenant Vance has revealed information that extends beyond his individual actions. There are questions about network connections that require careful examination, including questions about how certain operations were compromised." The temperature in the training ground seemed to drop several degrees. Walsh's expression remained controlled, but something shifted behind his eyes. Assessment, calculation, the recognition of a threat that had just become significantly more serious. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Petty Officer." "I'm not implying anything, sir. I'm simply noting that thorough investigations sometimes reveal unexpected connections. People who thought they were protected by rank or reputation discover that evidence doesn't respect hierarchy." The silence that followed stretched like a wire being drawn taut. Then Walsh laughed, a sound that held no humor whatsoever. "You're quite bold for a logistics coordinator, or whatever you actually are." He turned back to Hayes, dismissing Ivy with the casual contempt of someone who had decided a threat was not worth acknowledging. "Commander, I'm going to see my son now. You can either facilitate that meeting, or you can explain to the Chief of Naval Operations why a Rear Admiral was obstructed from supporting his family member during a difficult time." Hayes hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then she nodded. "This way, Admiral." They walked away toward the administrative building, leaving Ivy standing on the training ground with the MP and the officers she did not recognize. Walsh did not look back, but his satisfaction was visible in every line of his posture. He thought he had won this exchange. He thought his rank and connections would protect him, as they always had. He thought that a logistics coordinator, regardless of her true capabilities, could not touch someone of his position. He was wrong. Ivy watched him disappear into the building, and behind the mask of her professional composure, she began to plan. Walsh was the target now. The investigation that had begun with Blake Vance would not end until it reached its true architect, and when it did, no amount of rank or reputation would be enough to save him from the reckoning that was coming. The night deepened around the base, bringing with it the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow light rather than merely obscure it. Ivy returned to her quarters but did not sleep. Instead, she sat at her small desk, turning Hayes' challenge coin over in her fingers while her mind worked through scenarios and possibilities. Walsh's arrival had changed the tactical situation. His presence meant that whatever protection his connections provided was now actively deployed. Any investigation that moved too slowly would give him time to destroy evidence, influence witnesses, and construct defenses that would be difficult to penetrate. Speed was essential, but speed without precision was worse than useless. At 0200 hours, her secure communication device buzzed with an incoming message. "Observation Tower, 30 minutes. The sender code indicated Hayes, but something about the timing felt wrong. The commander would not normally request a meeting in the middle of the night unless circumstances had changed dramatically. Ivy armed herself with the concealed blade she had kept hidden throughout her assignment and made her way across the darkened base. The observation tower loomed against the star-filled sky, its windows dark, its platforms empty. She climbed the stairs with silent footsteps, her senses stretched to maximum alertness. Every shadow was a potential threat. Every sound was a potential warning. The top platform was not empty. A figure stood at the railing, looking out over the sleeping base. Not Hayes. The silhouette was wrong. The posture was different. Rear Admiral Douglas Walsh turned as she reached the platform, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You came. I wasn't certain you would." Ivy's hand moved toward her hidden weapon. "You sent the message. I borrowed Commander Hayes' communication system, temporarily. She'll notice the breach eventually, but by then, our conversation will be complete." Walsh's voice was calm, almost conversational, as if they were discussing routine administrative matters rather than confronting each other in the dead of night. "You've been very clever, Petty Officer Mercer, or should I call you something else? Your personnel file is remarkably incomplete, but the gaps tell their own story." "I don't know what you're talking about, sir." "Of course you don't." Walsh moved away from the railing, closing the distance between them with measured steps. "You're just a logistics coordinator who happens to possess Tier 1 combat capabilities. Just a clerk who knows things about classified operations that she shouldn't have access to. Just a woman who survived something that killed everyone else and then spent 2 years hunting for answers." The pretense had become pointless. "How long have you known?" "About your presence here, 3 days after you arrived. I have people who monitor for certain things, certain names, certain patterns. When a ghost from Crimson Gate surfaced at one of my bases, I was naturally interested. Interested enough to have me killed?" Walsh laughed, the same humorless sound he had produced earlier. "If I wanted you dead, you would be dead. I have resources for that sort of thing. But dead bodies create investigations, questions, complications. Much better to keep potential threats close, where they can be observed and controlled." Is that what Vance was doing? Controlling me? Vance was a tool, an imprecise one, as it turned out. His job was to assess your capabilities and report on your activities. Instead, he got himself compromised through carelessness and ego. Walsh shook his head with what might have been genuine disappointment. Good help is remarkably difficult to find. Ivy's mind raced through tactical options. Walsh had arranged this meeting in a location that favored neither of them. The observation platform offered limited cover and multiple potential escape routes. If he had brought backup, they would be positioned on the approaches. If he had not, then he was either supremely confident or supremely foolish. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to understand your situation. You've spent 2 years believing that you were the hunter, believing that your survival was a matter of skill and luck and determination, believing that eventually you would find the truth and achieve some form of justice for your fallen comrades." Walsh stopped, close enough that she could smell his aftershave, close enough that her hidden blade could reach vital organs before he could react. "The truth, Petty Officer Mercer, is that you were allowed to survive. Your team was eliminated because they had become inconvenient. They had discovered things about certain operations that could not be permitted to become public. You were spared because you were useful. A loose end that could be monitored. A thread that could be followed to identify other potential problems." The words hit like physical blows. All her struggles, all her losses, all her desperate fight to survive and find answers. It had all been permitted, controlled, part of someone else's design. "You're lying. I'm telling you what you need to know to make an informed decision. Because despite everything, you have a choice to make." Walsh reached into his jacket, and Ivy's hand tightened on her concealed weapon. But what he produced was not a gun. It was a file folder. Inside this folder is documentation of Swiss bank accounts in your name. Enough money to disappear completely, to start a new life somewhere that the people I work for will never find you. All you have to do is walk away, stop investigating, stop asking questions. Forget about Kandahar and Crimson Gate and everyone who died there. Ivy stared at the folder without touching it. "You're offering me a bribe. I'm offering you survival. The people I work with do not tolerate loose ends indefinitely. Your usefulness as an observable asset is diminishing. Eventually, the calculation will shift, and you will become more liability than value. When that happens," he shrugged expressively, "take the offer, take the money, disappear. It's more than most people in your position ever receive." For a long moment, Ivy stood motionless, her mind calculating possibilities that had nothing to do with the offer Walsh was presenting. He had come here alone. He had armed himself with words instead of weapons. He had offered escape instead of threatening elimination, which meant he was afraid. Not of her capabilities, of what she knew, or what she might discover. No. The word was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. Walsh's expression flickered, surprise, disappointment, and beneath both, something that might have been respect. That's unfortunate. I had hoped we could resolve this situation without additional unpleasantness. Additional unpleasantness. Ivy's voice turned cold. 12 people died at Kandahar because someone betrayed them. My brother died. My team died. And you call the consequences of that betrayal unpleasantness? I call it pragmatism. The operation your team was conducting threatened significant interests. Interests that could not permit the information they had gathered to reach official channels. Sometimes, protecting the greater good requires difficult choices. The greater good? Is that what you tell yourself? That selling operational intelligence to foreign powers serves some greater purpose? Walsh's composure cracked slightly. You understand nothing about what's actually at stake. You see black and white where there are only shades of gray. The world I operate in doesn't conform to the simple morality they teach in training. Sometimes the only way to protect American interests is to work with people and methods that would not survive public scrutiny. And Crimson Gate? 12 Americans dead to protect what interests exactly? To protect an ongoing operation that was achieving more success than your brother's mission ever could. The intelligence network we have built over the past decade has prevented more attacks, saved more lives, and advanced American security more effectively than any conventional military action. Walsh's voice rose with conviction. Your team stumbled into something they didn't understand and couldn't be allowed to expose. Their deaths were regrettable but necessary. Necessary? Ivy repeated the word like it was poison. You murdered 12 people and call it necessary. I made a difficult decision in service of a larger goal. That's what command requires. That's what separates leaders from followers. The willingness to accept costs that others cannot comprehend. Ivy's hand closed on her hidden blade. Every instinct screamed at her to end this conversation in the most final way possible. Walsh stood before her, unarmed, confessing to crimes that had destroyed everything she loved. Justice was within reach, but killing him would not expose the network he had built. It would not identify the other compromised personnel. It would not bring her brother back or give meaning to the deaths of her teammates. It would be vengeance, not victory. Satisfaction, not closure. You made a mistake coming here alone, she said quietly. Did I? Walsh's confidence returned. You could kill me. You have the capability and clearly the motivation. But what would that accomplish? You would become a murderer, a fugitive. Everything you've worked for would be destroyed, and the networks I've built would continue operating without me. He smiled. I'm not the head of this organization, petty officer. I'm a regional coordinator, one of many. My death would be inconvenient, but not catastrophic. Then why are you here? Why offer me money and explanations if your death doesn't matter? Because I would prefer not to die, and because there's another option that benefits both of us. Walsh's expression became calculating. You have skills that are valuable, connections to people, and information that could be useful. Instead of fighting against an organization you cannot defeat, you could become part of it. Join us. Use your capabilities in service of a cause that actually matters. The offer hung in the air between them like a physical object. Join the people who had murdered her brother. Work alongside those who had betrayed everything she believed in. Become the thing she had spent 2 years trying to destroy. No, Walsh sighed, a sound that carried genuine disappointment. I expected that answer, but I felt obligated to make the offer. Your brother, for all his talent, was equally inflexible. He could not see beyond his narrow conception of duty and honor, and look where that rigidity led him. My brother died a hero. Your brother died because he could not adapt to reality, and you're about to make the same mistake. Walsh stepped back, reaching into his pocket. I really did hope we could resolve this differently. What happened next occurred in fragments that Ivy would later struggle to reconstruct. Walsh's hand emerging from his pocket, holding not a weapon, but a small transmitter. The distant sound of footsteps on the stairs below. The realization that he had not come alone after all, that the conversation had been a delay while his people positioned themselves. She moved. The observation platform became a blur of motion and violence as Ivy's training took over. Walsh stumbled backward as she launched herself toward the stairwell, colliding with the first figure who emerged from the darkness. Her blade found soft tissue before he could raise his weapon. The second figure had time to fire once, the shot going wide as she redirected his aim and sent him tumbling over the railing. Then she was running, descending the stairs in controlled leaps while alarms began to sound across the base. Walsh's voice echoed from above, shouting commands to unseen forces. The night had become a battlefield, and she was alone behind enemy lines. The base that had been her home for 8 months transformed into hostile territory. Every shadow concealed potential threats. Every building offered both cover and danger. Walsh's people would be everywhere now, hunting for the woman who had just rejected his offer and proven herself too dangerous to let escape. But Ivy had spent 8 months learning this terrain. 8 months identifying hiding places and escape routes. 8 months preparing for exactly this possibility. She disappeared into the darkness, and behind her, Rear Admiral Douglas Walsh stood on the observation platform, watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The base had become a hunting ground, but Ivy Mercer had been hunted before. In the mountains of Kandahar, she had survived 63 days alone in enemy territory after her team was annihilated. She had moved through hostile villages, evaded search parties, and killed 17 men who stood between her and extraction. A military installation in California, even one where the enemy wore American uniforms, was nothing compared to that crucible. She reached the equipment storage facility within 4 minutes, using routes that avoided the main thoroughfares and security cameras. The building was locked, but she had memorized the access codes months ago, one of many precautions that her paranoid preparation had demanded. Inside, she found what she needed, a tactical radio tuned to frequencies that Walsh's people would not be monitoring, a backup weapon from the training armory, and most importantly, time to think. Walsh had revealed himself. That was both advantage and complication. She now knew definitively that he was the architect behind Crimson Gate, but she also knew that he commanded resources far beyond what a single Rear Admiral should possess. His network extended through multiple installations, multiple agencies, possibly multiple countries. Taking him down would require more than evidence. It would require allies. Her tactical radio crackled with encrypted traffic. Walsh's people coordinating their search, establishing perimeters, closing off escape routes, professional voices executing professional protocols. Whatever Walsh was paying them, it was enough to command loyalty that superseded their oaths to the United States Navy. But not everyone on this base was compromised. Ivy keyed her radio to a frequency she had memorized but never used. "Garrett, this is Mercer. Walsh has made his move. I need extraction from equipment storage building 7. Silence. Then, confirm identity. Authentication phrase. Per umbras ad lucem, through shadows to light, the motto of Ghost Unit 7. Copy, stay put, 5 minutes. The wait was the hardest part. Ivy positioned herself near the rear exit, weapon ready, listening to the sounds of the search closing in around her. Walsh's people were systematic, professional, exactly what she would expect from operators who had been corrupted by money or ideology or whatever poison had turned them against their own country. 4 minutes and 30 seconds after her transmission, the rear door opened. Master Chief Noah Garrett slipped inside, followed by 2 figures she recognized, Fern Holloway and, unexpectedly, Mason Holt. "What is he doing here?" Ivy demanded, her weapon tracking toward Mason before training overcame surprise. "He came to me an hour ago," Garrett explained, his voice low and urgent. "Said he'd seen something that didn't make sense. Walsh's people moving equipment that wasn't on any manifest, communications that bypassed normal channels. He wanted to understand what was happening." Mason stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely absent. "I was wrong about you. I've been wrong about a lot of things, but I'm not wrong about this. Something is seriously messed up on this base, and I want to help fix it." Ivy studied his face, looking for deception and finding only earnest determination. The bully who had kicked her clipboard 2 days ago had been replaced by something else, a warrior who had recognized a threat to his country and chosen the right side. "We don't have time for this conversation," Garrett interrupted. "Walsh has people covering every exit. We need to move before they tighten the perimeter." "Where?" "Commander Hayes has established a secure position in the administrative building. Admiral Thornton arrived 30 minutes ago from Norfolk. Whatever Walsh was planning, it's unraveling faster than he anticipated." Admiral Thornton, the Shadow, the man who had been watching from the observation tower when this entire situation began. His presence changed the tactical calculations significantly. Thornton outranked Walsh and commanded respect throughout the special operations community that few officers could match. "How do we reach the administrative building?" Garrett smiled grimly. "Through the training tunnels. Walsh's people don't know they exist. They were sealed years ago, but I kept a key. The tunnels were dark, narrow, and smelled of decades of accumulated dust. They had been built during the Cold War for purposes that remained classified, connecting various buildings across the base through underground passages that did not appear on any current schematic. Ivy moved through the darkness with her weapon ready, Garrett on point, Mason and Fern covering their rear. An unlikely team, but functional. Whatever their differences on the surface, in this moment they were united by purpose that transcended personal history. They emerged in the basement of the administrative building to find Commander Hayes waiting with a security team that looked ready for combat. "Thank God," Hayes breathed when she saw Ivy. "We've been monitoring the situation. Walsh has gone completely off the rails. He's got at least 20 personnel loyal to him trying to secure the base, and he's been making calls to contacts we haven't identified yet." "He confessed," Ivy said flatly. "On the observation tower. He admitted responsibility for Crimson Gate. He offered me money to disappear, then tried to have me killed when I refused." Hayes' expression hardened. "That's enough for immediate action, but we need more to dismantle his network. We need documentation, communications, financial records. We need him to keep talking," Garrett added, "in front of witnesses who can testify to what he says." Ivy thought about Walsh's arrogance, his certainty that his position made him untouchable. That arrogance was a weakness that could be exploited. "Where is Admiral Thornton?" "Upstairs. He's been waiting for you." The conference room on the third floor had been transformed into a command center. Screens displayed security feeds from across the base, showing Walsh's people maintaining their positions, while regular base personnel looked on in confusion. The situation was balanced on a razor's edge, capable of tipping toward violence at any moment. Admiral Isaac Thornton stood at the head of the table, studying the displays with the focused intensity that had earned him his nickname. He was older than Walsh, his hair completely gray, his face carved by decades of command responsibility, but his eyes were sharp, and when they found Ivy as she entered the room, they held recognition that went beyond mere acknowledgement. "Commander Mercer," he said quietly, "it's been a long time." The use of her real rank sent a ripple of surprise through the room. Hayes, Garrett, even Mason all turned to stare at the woman they had known as a logistics coordinator. "Admiral," Ivy came to attention, the automatic response of a lifetime of military discipline. "At ease, we're well past formalities." Thornton moved toward her, his gaze cataloging the changes that 2 years of hunting and hiding had written on her face. "I received your brother's last transmission. The one he sent before Crimson Gate went dark. He told me what you had discovered, what you were both trying to expose. You knew? All this time you knew what happened?" "I knew pieces, fragments, enough to suspect, but not enough to act." Thornton's expression carried the weight of that knowledge. The evidence pointed towards someone highly placed, but Walsh's network was too well insulated. Every investigation hit walls that seemed to appear from nowhere. I needed someone inside, someone who could get close enough to gather the proof that would survive legal scrutiny. You positioned me here. I positioned resources that would allow you to position yourself. Your assignment to Coronado was your choice, even if I made sure the option was available. Thornton turned back to the displays. "Walsh knows the game is ending. He's desperate, which makes him dangerous. But desperation also makes people careless. What's the plan? We draw him out, make him believe he still has options. Then we take those options away one by one until the only path left is confession." Thornton looked at her directly. "But to do that, we need to show him something he fears more than exposure. We need to show him what he's actually facing. Which is? You, the survivor of Crimson Gate, the ghost he thought he had buried." Thornton's voice dropped. "It's time to stop hiding, Commander. It's time to show them who you really are." The confrontation was staged in the main briefing room, where the investigation into Blake Vance had originally been conducted. Hayes arranged for Walsh to be summoned under the pretense of an urgent development in his son's case. Connor was brought in as well, looking terrified and confused, still uncertain whether he was witness or defendant in the unfolding drama. When Walsh entered the room, his composure was strained but intact. He had clearly been expecting some form of official response to his failed operation, but the sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Admiral Thornton sat at the head of the table, his flag officer authority radiating from every aspect of his bearing. Flanking him were Commander Hayes, Master Chief Garrett, and a row of personnel whose expressions ranged from grim to furious. The security feeds that had been displayed upstairs were now projected on the main screen, showing Walsh's people being systematically detained by base security forces that had been quietly mobilized while he was distracted. And standing at the far end of the room, still wearing the logistics uniform that had concealed her true identity for 8 months, was Ivy Mercer. But something had changed. She had removed her outer jacket, revealing the tactical undershirt beneath. And on her right shoulder, visible for the first time since she had arrived at Coronado, was a tattoo that made Walsh's face drain of color, a skull surrounded by 7 stars. Beneath it, coordinates: 37.2350 degrees north, 115.8111 degrees west. The location of a training facility that officially did not exist. The symbol of Ghost Unit 7. "No," Walsh breathed. "That's not possible. You were supposed to be..." "Dead?" Ivy's voice was cold, control, carrying the authority of someone who had survived things that would have broken lesser souls. That was the plan, wasn't it? Eliminate the entire team, leave no witnesses, cover up whatever we had discovered. I don't know what you're talking about. This is some kind of elaborate deception. But Walsh's protests lacked conviction. His eyes kept returning to the tattoo, to the evidence of a past that was supposed to have been erased. "Rear Admiral Douglas Walsh," Thornton's voice cut through the room like a blade, "you are being detained pending investigation for espionage, conspiracy to commit murder, and treason against the United States of America. This is absurd. I'm a flag officer with 30 years of distinguished service. You can't possibly..." "I can. I am. And the evidence supporting these charges is extensive." Thornton nodded toward Hayes, who activated a display showing communication logs, financial transactions, and operational timelines that painted a damning picture. "Lieutenant Vance has been cooperative since his detention. He's provided testimony identifying you as his handler. He's documented the network you built. And he's confirmed your role in compromising Operation Crimson Gate." Walsh's composure finally cracked. "Vance is a liar. He'll say anything to save himself. Then you won't mind if we examine the communications that were routed through your personal systems, the payments that were deposited into accounts you control, the operational details that only someone with your access could have provided?" Thornton leaned forward. "The game is over, Douglas. The only question now is how much damage you do to yourself and your son on the way down." Connor Walsh looked up at the mention of his name, his young face a mask of horror and betrayal. "Dad, what are they talking about? What did you do?" "Connor, be quiet. This is a misunderstanding that will be resolved through proper channels." But Walsh's voice had lost its authority. The father who had always seemed invincible was crumbling before his son's eyes. "There's something else," Ivy said, stepping forward until she stood directly in front of Walsh. "Something that Vance couldn't tell you because he didn't know. The intelligence that my team gathered in Kandahar, the information that you killed 12 people to suppress, it didn't die with them. I memorized it. Every name, every date, every connection. I've been carrying your entire network in my head for 2 years, waiting for this moment." Walsh stared at her, and in his eyes she saw the death of hope. He had believed that Crimson Gate had ended the threat his organization faced. He had believed that eliminating the team had eliminated the evidence. He had never considered that a survivor might carry the truth inside her skull, protected by the training that his own military had provided. "You're bluffing. Viktor Petrov, Sergei Volkov, the account at Credit Suisse that was established in 2014, the dead drop in Istanbul that your people used for 18 months before moving to the one in Cyprus." Ivy recited names and details that made Walsh flinch with each revelation. "I can do this for hours. I can name every asset, every operation, every compromised officer in your network. And I will, unless you do something useful for once in your miserable life. What do you want?" "Confession. Complete. Recorded. Admissible in court." Ivy's gray eyes held no mercy. "You're going to spend the rest of your life in prison regardless of what you do now. But if you cooperate, if you help us dismantle the network you built, your son might have a chance at a future that doesn't include being associated with his father's treason." Connor made a sound that might have been a sob. Walsh looked at his son, and something shifted in his expression. The arrogance, the certainty, the conviction that he was serving some greater purpose. All of it collapsed before the simple reality of a young man whose life was about to be destroyed by his father's choices. "I want immunity for Connor." "That's not on the table," Thornton replied. Then I want assurance that he won't be prosecuted for things he didn't know about. He was a pawn. I used him. He doesn't deserve to pay for my decisions." Hayes exchanged glances with Thornton. Some silent communication passed between them. "If your cooperation is complete and genuine, we can recommend that Connor be treated as a material witness rather than a co-conspirator. But that recommendation is contingent on you providing everything you know: names, dates, methods, every piece of information that will help us identify and neutralize the remaining elements of your network." Walsh closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the Rear Admiral was gone. Only a defeated old man remained. "Where do you want me to start?" The confession took 14 hours. Walsh documented a network that stretched across 4 continents and included personnel in military, intelligence, and diplomatic positions that would have seemed impossible without his detailed testimony. He explained how the organization had been built over decades, how it justified its existence through claims of serving American interests through methods that official channels could not employ. He explained Crimson Gate. Ivy listened to every word, her face expressionless as Walsh described how her team had stumbled onto communications that revealed the network's existence, how the decision had been made to eliminate them before they could report their findings, how the ambush had been arranged, the intelligence deliberately falsified, the rescue deliberately delayed until there was no one left to rescue, almost no one. "We didn't know you had survived until you surfaced 3 months later at a forward operating base in Pakistan," Walsh said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "By then, it was too late to arrange another termination without raising questions. So we decided to monitor you instead, wait for you to lead us to anyone else who might have survived or received information from your team." "There was no one else," Ivy said quietly. "I was alone." "Yes, we eventually realized that, but by then you had become useful as a potential asset, someone who could be watched, someone whose activities might reveal other threats to our operation." Walsh shook his head. "We underestimated you. I underestimated you. That was my mistake." "Your mistake was betraying your country and murdering American soldiers," Thornton corrected coldly. "Everything else flows from that original sin." The dawn was breaking over Coronado by the time Walsh was escorted to secure detention. The network he had built was not yet destroyed, but its exposure had begun. Across multiple installations, officers and personnel whose names appeared in Walsh's testimony were being detained for questioning. The process of dismantling decades of betrayal would take months, possibly years. But it had started. In the aftermath, Ivy found herself standing on the observation platform where Walsh had made his offer less than 24 hours earlier. The Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon, painted gold and pink by the rising sun. The beauty seemed obscene after the ugliness that the night had revealed. Footsteps on the stairs announced company. She turned to find Mason Holt approaching, his face carrying an expression she had never seen on it before: humility. "Permission to join you?" She nodded, and he came to stand beside her at the railing. "I owe you an apology," he said, "not just for what happened with the clipboard, for everything. The way I treated you, the assumptions I made, the person I was." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I joined the Navy because I wanted to be a warrior. I wanted to be the best, the strongest, the most dangerous person in any room. I thought that's what being a SEAL meant. And now I realize I didn't understand what I was training for. It's not about being dangerous. It's about being willing to sacrifice everything for something bigger than yourself." He looked at her directly. "You lost your team, your brother, your identity, and you kept going anyway. You spent 2 years hunting the people responsible, alone, with no support and no guarantee of success. That's what a real warrior looks like." Ivy considered his words. The young man who had mocked her in the training yard was trying to become someone better. Whether he would succeed remained to be seen, but the effort itself was meaningful. "I was supposed to hate you," she admitted. "When I arrived here, when I saw how you treated people you considered beneath you, I thought you were exactly the kind of person who made the military weak, the kind of person who valued appearance over substance. I was that person. Maybe, but people can change. I've seen enough evidence of that to believe it's possible." She turned back to the ocean. "Admiral Thornton is assembling a new team, specialists for a specific kind of work, the kind of work that my unit used to do before it was destroyed." Mason's breath caught. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that if you want to be more than you've been, if you want to serve something bigger than your own ego, there might be a place for you, but it would mean starting over, proving yourself from the beginning, being willing to learn from people you used to dismiss. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. Then Mason nodded slowly. I'd like that, if you'll have me. That's not my decision alone, but I'll speak for you when the time comes. They stood together in the morning light, two people who had started as enemies and were becoming something else entirely. Behind them, the base was waking up to a new reality. The corruption that had festered in its foundations had been exposed. The healing could begin, but healing was a process, not an event. And for Ivy Mercer, the process had only started. The memorial service was held 3 weeks later on a quiet hillside overlooking the Pacific. 12 markers stood in a row, simple stones bearing names that would never appear in official histories. The men and women of Ghost Unit 7, finally receiving the honor that had been denied them for 2 years. Ivy stood before the marker that bore her brother's name, Sergeant Elijah Mercer, the man who had taught her everything that mattered, the man whose death had transformed her from an operator into something else entirely. I found them, Eli, she whispered. I found the people who did this to you, to all of you. They're going to pay for what they did. The wind carried her words away, but she liked to think that somehow, somewhere, he heard them. Admiral Thornton approached as the other attendees began to disperse. Hayes was among them, along with Garrett, Fern, and the others who had helped bring Walsh's network to justice. Even Connor Walsh had attended, his young face marked by grief for victims he had never known and shame for a father he had thought he understood. It's time to discuss the future, Thornton said quietly. Ghost Unit 7 is being reactivated. New personnel, new mandate, new opportunities to serve. Ivy looked at the 12 markers one last time. Who will command it? That's your decision. The position is yours if you want it, but I'll understand if you've had enough. You've given more than anyone could reasonably ask. The choice hung before her like a door waiting to be opened. She could walk away, disappear into civilian life, try to build something normal from the wreckage of everything she had lost. Or she could continue, lead a new team, protect others from the threats that had destroyed her family. She thought about Elijah, about the promise she had made over his grave, about the dog tags that still hung around her neck, a constant reminder of what she owed to those who had fallen. I'll do it, she said, on one condition. Name it. I choose my own team, no interference from command, no political considerations, only people I trust with my life. Thornton nodded. Agreed. Ivy turned away from the markers and looked at the people who had gathered to honor the fallen. Garrett, whose quiet wisdom had guided her through the darkness. Hayes, who had been willing to risk everything to help expose the truth. Fern, whose kindness had reminded her that not everyone was an enemy. Mason, who was trying to become the warrior he had always claimed to be. And others, faces she was beginning to know. People who might become the foundation of something new. I'll need time to prepare, she said. There's a lot of work to do before we're operational. Take whatever time you need. I'll ensure you have the resources. As Thornton walked away, Ivy reached beneath her shirt and pulled out 2 objects. The challenge coin that Hayes had given her, bearing the motto of Ghost Unit 7, and Elijah's dog tags, worn smooth by years of contact with her skin. I promised I'd finish what we started, brother, she murmured. I'm keeping that promise. She slipped both objects back into concealment and walked toward the people who were waiting for her. The past was buried. The present was secure. The future was uncertain but full of possibility. Ghost Unit 7 would rise again, and those who threatened America would learn to fear a name that had been whispered in shadows for 2 years. Wraith, the woman they could not kill, the warrior they could not break, the commander who would forge a new generation of heroes from the ashes of betrayal. Her phone buzzed with an incoming message. Unknown sender. 3 words that made her blood run cold. We're still watching. Ivy looked up, scanning the hillside with eyes that missed nothing. Somewhere out there, remnants of Walsh's network had survived. Somewhere, people who had escaped justice were planning their next move. The war was not over. It had only entered a new phase. She pocketed her phone and allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. Let them watch. Let them plan. Let them believe they still had a chance. They would learn. They would all learn. The ghosts of Unit 7 were not finished yet, and neither was she. Ivy Mercer's story is not merely a tale of war or revenge. It is a story about the true strength of the human spirit when facing seemingly insurmountable adversity. Lesson 1. Never judge others by their appearance. Mason Holt and the others saw a small woman in a logistics uniform, but they failed to see the warrior who had survived hell itself. Every person carries stories that we cannot see on the surface. The quiet server at your local diner, the janitor at your office, the clerk at the grocery store, any one of them might be a hero whose sacrifices protect the freedoms we take for granted. Lesson 2. True strength is not measured by muscles or loud voices. It is measured by resilience, by the ability to endure pain and loss while continuing to fight for what matters. Ivy lost her brother, her team, and her identity. Yet, she transformed that loss into purpose. Lesson 3. Redemption is always possible. Mason began as a bully, but he chose to become something better. The path to change starts with a single decision to be more than we were yesterday. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to our channel. Share it with someone who needs to hear that heroes walk among us every day, often unrecognized and unappreciated. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and which moment gave you chills. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage, sacrifice, and redemption to audiences around the world. Together, we honor those who serve in silence.